Have you ever wondered why your presence unsettles people who barely know you? Why do they watch from a distance, whisper your name in places you've never been, and react to your silence like it's a threat? Why does your peace seem to irritate spirits that thrive in chaos? It's not because of anything you said, it's because of who you are in the spirit. When you're truly chosen by God, there's a certain frequency you carry that disturbs what's been dormant, exposes what's been hidden, and confronts what's been comfortable in deception. You don't have to fight to be a disruptor. Your mere existence becomes a confrontation for systems that were built to control, oppress, and manipulate. That's why you've been watching, not just by people, but by principalities. That's why doors that should have opened stayed shut. That's why attacks came out of nowhere. And that's exactly why heaven responded before you even understood what was happening. Because when a chosen one reaches divine activation, protection becomes non-negotiable. You're not walking alone, not because you begged for help, but because what you carry can't afford to fall into the wrong hands. Heaven has already moved on your behalf, deploying forces you can't see. Angels trained for invisible war, assigned not out of pity, but because of divine strategy. If this resonates with you, comment 777 below to confirm that your spirit knows exactly what's happening. And to every soul who's poured into this channel through a super thanks, I see you, I bless you, and I thank you deeply. Your support is helping carry these messages to people who are just now realizing they were never crazy, they were always chosen. And now, in the next few minutes, I'm going to reveal why those spiritual forces have been deployed around you, not because of who you were, but because of what hell already knows you're becoming. Let's dive in. God's chosen ones, you were tracked in the spirit. So heaven sent its hidden force. Number 1. You're not a civilian in the spirit realm. You're high-risk intel. What if I told you that in the architecture of the spiritual realm, you're not a civilian at all, but encrypted intel in human form? From the outside, you may appear like just another person, blending into the flow of daily life, clocking in, smiling politely, checking your messages like everyone else. But in the unseen dimension, your existence isn't casual. It's classified. You are not just seen, you are tracked. Not because you're loud, but because what you carry vibrates at a frequency that disrupts every false structure built on illusion, like subatomic particles in quantum physics that change behavior when observed. Your presence alone alters the dynamic of every room, every relationship, every system that isn't rooted in truth. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers. Ephesians 6:12. You were born into this tension, not by choice, but by divine assignment. What you know intuitively without formal teaching, what you've endured silently without unraveling, is not common. It's encrypted, coded into your soul, and that makes you dangerous. Why do certain people grow quiet when you enter the room? Even if you've said nothing, why does your energy confuse them, attract them, then repel them all at once? Because your spiritual resonance exposes shadows. You are the anomaly they can't categorize, the irregularity in the algorithm. But here's a question no one dares to ask out loud. What if your silence is more disruptive than their words? Early on, they felt it. Teachers who couldn't explain your insight, friends who studied your resilience like a blueprint, lovers who got close only to try and break what they couldn't understand, like wolves masquerading in warmth. They approached not with love, but with strategy. And you, being spiritually armored, watched them misinterpret your calm for weakness. They thought you were oblivious, yet all the while, you were decoding them. Logging behavioral data like a tactician trained for emotional warfare. Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Matthew 6:16. That's exactly what you've been. You were never meant to walk around unguarded. You weren't given watchers because you're fragile, but because you're volatile. Spiritually, you're like uranium, dormant in appearance, but powerful enough to level strongholds if mishandled. That's why heaven assigned you what most will never see: divine security clearance. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. Psalm 34:7. You move with protection that operates beyond natural logic. Let me show you a contrast. Grigory Rasputin, a Russian mystic who once influenced the royal Romanovs, believed he had divine insight, but what he carried was corrupted discernment and manipulative control. He drew people in by claiming supernatural power, but left behind a trail of political destruction, spiritual distortion, and emotional manipulation. His legacy: death, downfall, and disgrace. You are the inverse of that. Where he exploited influence to control empires, you carry light that confronts them. Meanwhile, Howard Thurman, a mystic philosopher and spiritual advisor to Martin Luther King Jr., once said, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it." He understood the weight of hidden influence. His presence wasn't loud, but his spiritual depth shook systems from the inside out. You walk in that kind of weight. 2. There's a story they'll never write in textbooks. A young woman named Naila lived in a small village where people only valued the visible titles: wealth, status. She spoke little, but knew things before they happened. When a leader in the town tried to manipulate the community with false prophecy, she exposed it not by words, but by unshakable peace that disrupted the lie. The man lost his power not through confrontation, but through the unraveling that truth always brings. No one knew Naila's name before, but from that day forward, even her silence was watched, just like certain animals in the wild. You are not designed to be easily understood. The snow leopard, for example, is rarely seen, but its presence reshapes the entire ecosystem. Biologists call it a keystone species because everything else adjusts around it. You are that spiritually, even when hidden. The atmosphere around you rearranges itself in response, and that's why you feel the tension. Not everyone walks with watchers. Not everyone is spiritually escorted. But when your spiritual resonance destabilizes demonic infrastructure, protocols get activated. There is a war for what you carry, not because you signed up for one, but because your soul came encoded with frequency maps that hell has been trying to jam since your first breath. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. Isaiah 54:17. Your existence is disruptive, not because you intended it, but because heaven embedded something in you that refuses to be silent. And what if the thing that makes you feel watched is actually a divine signal that you're finally walking in your assignment? Some call it paranoia, but spiritually, it's protocol. You are not just alive. You are monitored, guarded, covered not for safety, but for strategy. He will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. Psalm 34:11. You are carrying too much light to be left unshielded in a world that profits off darkness. And maybe you've been asking the wrong question this whole time, not why am I being attacked, but what truth in me are they trying to silence? So if it feels like something unseen is always watching, it's because it is. If it feels like your life has been under surveillance, under tension, under pressure, it's because you're not common intel. You are divine infrastructure, and heaven refuses to let you fall into enemy hands. This isn't the time to second-guess your weight. This is the hour to rise in full authority and walk like the high-risk intel you were born to be. You are not a civilian. You are the system breaker they were warned about. Now, move accordingly. Number 2. Your presence disarms hidden weapons. Have you ever walked into a room and felt the air shift like something intangible recoiled before you even spoke? It wasn't your outfit. It wasn't your tone. It was your frequency. There's a reason some people straighten up, go quiet, or suddenly change the subject when you arrive. It's not intimidation in the worldly sense. It's spiritual disruption. You don't even have to make eye contact. Just standing there shifts the molecules in the room. Because your presence disarms hidden weapons, you're not reactive. You're not confrontational. And yet, truth begins to leak through the cracks the moment you're near. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5. That's who you are. Light not as decoration, but as revelation. You have this spiritual way of drawing truth out of hiding. People who rehearsed lies in the mirror before showing up find themselves stammering. People who wear charm-like armor feel their walls crumble. And it isn't because you called them out. It's because your very presence makes pretense unsustainable. The mirror you carry isn't made of glass, it's made of clarity. And not everyone is ready to see themselves in it. Is it possible that the discomfort people feel around you has nothing to do with arrogance and everything to do with their own unhealed shadows? Some couldn't stand you from day one. They couldn't explain why. They just felt off when you entered the space. They labeled you cold, intimidating, difficult. But they weren't reacting to your personality. They were reacting to what their spirit sensed. A presence they couldn't manipulate. A vibration that didn't bend to performance. A soul that couldn't be seduced by shallow power plays. Your discernment is precise, not analytical, but frequency-based, like echolocation in bats. You send out signals without trying, and what comes back isn't what people say, but who they are beneath the act. The tension in their voice, the stiffness in their smile, the forced laughter that betrays a carefully polished facade. These aren't accidents. They're energetic, and you read them like braille for the soul. Even darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day. Psalm 139:12. That's the clarity you walk in. You don't have to say much. You just have to show up. Let's look at someone who embodied this beautifully. Dorothy Day, the radical Catholic activist, writer, and co-founder of the Catholic worker movement, never raised her voice in protest. Yet she dismantled structures of greed, hypocrisy, and indifference with her quiet, holy presence. She once said, "My strength returns to me with my cup of coffee and the reading of the Psalms." Her disarming presence wasn't about rebellion, it was about conviction, a holy refusal to accept systems built on exploitation. And then, there's the other side. Elizabeth Holmes, founder of Theranos, built her empire on an illusion. She walked in with charm and ambition, but behind it all was manipulation, false claims, and a hunger for power. When people with real discernment began entering her orbit, Investigators, whistleblowers, quiet truth bearers, the facade unraveled. The empire built on lies collapsed under the weight of presence it couldn't deceive. That's what your spirit does. It collapses illusions, not through argument, but through atmosphere. There's a boy named Josiah, no more than 10, who once stepped into a schoolroom full of toxic energy. His teacher had a history of humiliating students under the guise of discipline. That day, she called Josiah to the front, expecting to rattle him, but instead of fear, the boy simply looked her in the eye, silent, unflinching. She froze. Something ancient in his presence triggered accountability. From that day forward, she never raised her voice again. Not because he fought her, but because something in him refused to bow to spiritual abuse. Can you imagine how many conflicts you've diffused simply by not participating in the dysfunction? Take the mimic octopus, a creature that doesn't confront its predators, but confuses them by reflecting their worst fears. It doesn't fight. It doesn't chase. It just shifts its energy to neutralize the threat. Your spirit functions the same way, causing manipulation to short-circuit simply because you see it. For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light. Luke 8:17. You are the light that can't help but reveal what's been concealed. And that's why retaliation shows up, not because you're aggressive, but because the mirror you carry forces people to see what they've worked hard to bury. You didn't choose to be a revealer. You were built for it. And heaven knew the weight of that role. That's why you've been spiritually covered from places you never saw, protected in battles you never fought, escorted by angelic forces in rooms where your only weapon was presence. You're not too much. Your energy just refuses to participate in collective delusion. That's why gossip never sticks. That's why smear campaigns collapse. Because at the end of the day, your spirit walks with authority, not noise. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. Isaiah 61. That glory doesn't need to shout. It just shows up, and everything false begins to shake. And maybe that's the real reason some people walk away, not because you failed them, but because your clarity wouldn't let them lie to themselves anymore. So let them flinch. Let them avoid eye contact. Let them whisper. Your job was never to please egos. Your presence was designed to confront what others pretend not to see. Your aura is not decoration. It's divine disruption. Your silence is not passivity. It's surveillance. Your energy is not sensitive. It's a weapon forged in fire, too precise for chaos, too holy for illusion, and too sharp for manipulation to survive around it. You are not here to blend in. You are here to shake what needs to fall. And because of that, you are protected, covered, walked with, backed by heaven. Now walk in like you know who you are, and let the shadows tremble. Number 3. They tried to study you, but you were already under surveillance by a higher command. What happens when those who think they're watching you don't realize they're the ones being watched? They thought they had you figured out, like a passive specimen under a microscope. You were dissected in conversations, gossiped about in private DMs, and monitored through digital traces and emotional traps. But what they missed, what they never calculated for, was that while they were taking mental notes, heaven was already compiling files. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. Proverbs 15:3. They studied you like a case, but they failed to understand that you were never their subject. You were a guarded vessel with sacred clearance. Every attempt to mimic your resilience, hijack your influence, manipulate your empathy, or distort your truth was seen, logged, and addressed by something far beyond their comprehension. They thought your quiet was ignorance, but your stillness was strategy. You weren't operating under panic, you were operating under protocol. And here's the uncomfortable truth for them. What if their obsession with you was the very thing that exposed them? Every fake smile, every friendly gesture laced with an agenda, every seemingly kind message meant to extract information. They weren't just emotionally loud, they were spiritually traceable. In biblical terms, you're not the observer, you are watched by heaven. For his eyes are in the ways of man, and he sees all his steps. Job 34:21. God wasn't just protecting you by shielding you. He was protecting you by documenting who moved against you, how they moved, and what they hoped to gain. Take the case of Pope John Paul II, not just a spiritual leader, but a survivor of assassination attempts, political scrutiny, and spiritual warfare. He once said, "Darkness can only be scattered by light, and hatred can only be conquered by love." His presence threatened entire regimes. But what protected him was not just security, it was prophetic covering. Even when monitored by enemies, he was being watched more closely by God. Contrast this with Julian Assange, founder of WikiLeaks, a man obsessed with information exposure, but whose own system was never built to handle the spiritual weight of truth. He tried to weaponize surveillance, but became trapped in a net of global consequences. In the end, the hunter became the hunted. That's what happens when one forgets that knowledge, without alignment, is a weapon with no aim. And in a quiet town, a teenage girl named Lorena experienced something similar. People befriended her because of her kindness and sharp intuition. They copied her words, her style, her thoughts, and yet always tried to downplay her presence. One day, when she finally confronted them in love, things spiraled. The more they tried to control her narrative, the more their own cracks surfaced. The town saw it. Heaven logged it. Lorena didn't fight them, she just kept walking. Covered. Years later, every single person who tried to exploit her either apologized, disappeared, or faced sudden, unexplainable setbacks. And isn't that what you felt? That strange discomfort in others when they look you in the eye too long? That feeling that something always backfires when people try to twist your story? It's not just karma, it's documentation. You are a walking spiritual case file, the glass-winged butterfly, with wings so transparent they're almost invisible, survives not by hiding, but by being seen only by the ones who can truly perceive. Predators often overlook it, thinking there's nothing to hunt, until they realize too late that its flight has rerouted the ecosystem. That's you, hidden in plain sight, not defenseless, but defended. No creature is hidden from his sight, but all are naked and exposed to the eyes of him to whom we must give account. Hebrews 4:13. This is why you're covered, not because you were silent, but because your silence had weight. Some of them can't sleep. Some can't thrive. Some experience relational collapse or emotional erosion after crossing you. Why? Because they didn't realize they had stepped onto spiritual landmines, sacred boundaries they weren't authorized to cross. Heaven didn't just protect you by removing you. It protected you by letting them expose themselves while thinking they were in control. Their emails are remembered. Their lies were time-stamped. Their conversations were recorded not by machines, but by the Spirit. God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Ecclesiastes 12:14. And the more they tried to analyze you, the more they documented themselves, the more they tried to define your story, the more they lost control of their own. What if your entire life wasn't just a testimony, but a timeline in the archives of divine justice? You were never powerless. You were positioned. You were never blind. You were being briefed. You were never naive. You were being led. Every word you didn't respond to, every time you refused to clap back, heaven noticed. And now, the protection over you has intensified because there's too much evidence. They thought they were watching you, but heaven was watching them, watching you. And now, your life speaks like a sealed file, untouchable, sealed, sacred. You're not just walking forward, you're walking with backup, covered, guarded, documented. So let them study, let them watch, let them whisper, because their surveillance only built the case for your protection. You are not just seen, you are watched by heaven, and now, it's too late for them to undo what's been recorded. Number 4. Your destiny was flagged as a strategic threat to corrupt systems. Have you ever wondered why your life has been unusually intense from the very beginning? Like something about you just wouldn't blend in? No matter how hard you tried, it's because you were flagged early. Before you even understood the weight of your purpose, spiritual systems had already taken note. Your name became classified intel the moment you started resisting manipulation, questioning false peace, and walking in raw, unfiltered truth. You didn't just disrupt people, you disturbed structures. You were born with a spiritual code embedded in your design, a divine pattern encrypted with the frequency of awakening. And corrupt systems, spiritual, cultural, even familial, felt the tremor before you ever spoke. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Jeremiah 1:5. You're not a wanderer. You're a disruptor with assignments. What if your healing was never just for you, but a key that unlocks generations of silence in others? What if your deliverance was the catalyst for the dismantling of hidden, inherited dysfunction? That's why you've been delayed, misunderstood, attacked, and misrepresented. Not because you're weak, but because your ripple effect is dangerous. Systems built on suppression fear one thing above all: contagious freedom. If you awaken, others will too. If you break free from shame, abuse, or silence, others will question the script they've obeyed for years. And that, to corrupted spiritual infrastructures, is intolerable. You weren't just fighting for your own voice, you were echoing futures. Remember Harriet Tubman, the abolitionist and conductor of the Underground Railroad? She wasn't a politician, a soldier, or a preacher, but she was dangerous. Why? Because her escape wasn't just escape, it was blueprint. She said, "I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves." Her journey threatened the entire economic and racial system because she carried a pattern of freedom, and that's exactly who you are, a living escape route. Now compare that to Jim Jones, a cult leader who created an entire system of control rooted in manipulation and fear. He weaponized trust, twisted scripture, and built a false family structure around loyalty and fear. But his system collapsed when individuals started asking real questions. The moment people began to see, the illusion shattered. That's why leaders like that fear people like you, because your clarity is viral. In the life of a man named Levi, a quiet counselor from a small city, this same spiritual tension played out. He didn't preach from a pulpit, but every session he held peeled back lies people lived under for decades. One day, his presence alone caused a senior religious leader in the area to publicly break down, confessing to years of abuse he'd hidden behind robes and ritual. Levi didn't do it with rage. He just carried truth, and that truth became a spiritual fire that no disguise could withstand. Do you now see why the attacks on you have been so irrational, so premature, and so strategic? They weren't just targeting your actions, they were trying to intercept your pattern. Nature shows us this clearly. In the mycorrhizal network, a massive underground fungal communication system connecting trees. One healthy tree can share information, immunity, and nourishment with weaker ones miles away. You are that tree. Your breakthrough feeds the forest. That's why certain forces tried to isolate you, cut your roots, or silence your testimony. It was never about just you. It was about your ability to awaken others. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners. Isaiah 61:1. That Spirit doesn't come to comfort structures, it comes to dismantle strongholds. You weren't rejected because you were difficult. You were rejected because your presence made performance impossible. You didn't lose relationships because of failure. You lost them because you stopped co-signing dysfunction. And they knew if you broke free, the script would collapse. So they tried to gaslight you, stall your growth, and confuse your identity. But heaven covered you, not for status, not for ego, but because your collapse would echo too loudly. What if the warfare over your life was never personal but structural? What if your preservation wasn't just about survival but legacy? That's why special assignments were sent. Not every blueprint gets preserved. Only the ones that threaten architecture not built by God. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Psalm Salim Vashebachat. And you, chosen one, were born to interrupt construction sites not authorized by heaven. So when they whispered, excluded, sabotaged, or tried to drain you, it was a reaction to their spiritual instinct. They knew something was encoded in you. They didn't have the words for it, but their spirits panicked around it. You're not carrying ambition. You're carrying architecture. You're not just called, you are strategic infrastructure. And that's why protection has followed you. Often without explanation, because heaven doesn't just protect people, it protects patterns that were meant to shake the earth. If you fall, systems continue. If you rise, blueprints activate. And now you're beginning to rise. The silence is ending. The codes are igniting. The tremors are returning. You didn't just survive for yourself. You were preserved for many. And now it's time to step fully into the blueprint they couldn't destroy. Number 5. Some people were warned to stay away from you, and they ignored it. Have you ever wondered why some people's lives start spiraling not long after crossing paths with you? There are individuals right now silently drowning in unexplained setbacks, emotionally disoriented, relationally unstable, spiritually drained, and they don't realize the origin isn't random. It's rooted in disobedience. They didn't just disrespect you, they disrespected the instructions that came with you long before the betrayal, the slander, the mockery, or the manipulation. There were warnings. Touch not mine anointed, and do my prophets no harm. 1 Chronicles 16:22. Spirit always flashes red, and those assigned to mishandle you were not uninformed. Some had disturbing dreams they couldn't shake. Others felt physical resistance, tightness in their chest, sudden nausea when planning to harm you. Some even had people around them say things like, "Something about them is different. Be careful." But ego spoke louder than reverence. They thought charm, intellect, or spiritual theatrics could override divine boundaries. What they didn't realize is that you weren't just walking with favor. You were walking with clearance. You weren't loud. You weren't boastful. But spiritually, you were heavily escorted, covered, tagged, monitored by divine authority. You weren't just kind. You were claimed. And that changes everything. Do they know what it means to tamper with a vessel that doesn't belong to them? There's a story in the Bible, King Belshazzar of Babylon, who once held a lavish feast using sacred vessels stolen from the temple of God. He drank from what was consecrated. He disrespected what was set apart. And that very night, a hand appeared on the wall, writing his judgment. He lost everything. Daniel sank. That's what happens when people treat holy things like they're disposable. For we know him who said, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay." Hebrews 10:30. This isn't about holding grudges. You probably still pray for some of the people who tried to sabotage you. You wanted restoration, not revenge. But spiritual law isn't emotional. It's structural. Once someone crosses a divine boundary, protocol initiates. Not out of vengeance, but protection. Remember Steve Jobs' biological father? Abdul Fattah Jandali abandoned jobs as a baby and spent decades working in the restaurant industry, never knowing he once served his own son, now one of the most influential innovators in the world. It's not punishment. It's a spiritual irony. What you dismiss in ignorance may return in revelation, but not on your terms. In contrast, Desmond Tutu, South African bishop and activist, treated even his enemies with dignity. His name is remembered with reverence not because he avoided conflict, but because he handled sacred tension with spiritual maturity. His reward, global honor. His fruit remains. Amara, a gifted music therapist in Lagos. She was quiet, soft-spoken, and filled with grace. Her co-workers saw her calm as weakness. One manager, driven by control, undermined her, sabotaged her client records, and mocked her faith behind closed doors. Within months, he fell into public scandal. Nothing Amara did. She stayed silent. But her peace provoked backlash he wasn't ready for. Why do some people crumble after betraying someone who never retaliated? It's not karma. It's a consequence. When someone is assigned divine protection, it's not decorative. It's functional. When they crossed you, they crossed a line heaven had clearly drawn. Nature shows us this too. The poison dart frog, vibrantly colored, tiny, beautiful looks, harmless. But when mishandled, its skin can paralyze or even kill. Its appearance is not an invitation, it's a warning. Some people think gentleness means access, but God hides power in the meek, and those who violate softness often learn the hard way. It was never softness, it was sacred restraint. Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them. Proverbs 26, 27. They didn't realize they were building their own downfall when they plotted against you. What's happening to them now? Their tricks no longer charm. Their relationships feel shallow. Their influence fades quickly. Spiritually, they feel lost. Why? Because when they ignored the instruction, they invited the consequence. Not your revenge, not your pettiness, but divine accountability. You didn't have to retaliate. Your peace is the clap back. Your joy is the judgment. Your silence is the sword. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. And every tongue that rises against you in judgment, you shall condemn. Isaiah 54:17. That's the protocol you live under. And when people violate spiritual protocols, especially around marked vessels like you, the fallout is inevitable. What they dismissed as superstition, they now experience as delay. What they mocked in private, they now battle in the open. Not because you cursed them, but because heaven corrected them. You are not vengeful, but you are covered. You are not arrogant, but you are marked. You don't respond like they expect, because heaven already did. Your rise is the verdict. Your peace is the punishment. Your protection is the proof. The warning wasn't just a gentle suggestion, it was a spiritual announcement. And when divine announcements are ignored, judgment writes its own timeline. Number 6. Your spirit holds evidence of realms most don't survive encountering. Have you ever looked around and quietly wondered why you feel so old inside, as if your soul has walked through chambers others haven't even imagined? That's because you have. Spiritually, you've stepped into dimensions most people aren't even permitted to visit, let alone survive. Not in theory, not in church language, but in visceral, unspeakable, supernatural reality. You've fought things without names. You've felt storms break over your mind with no natural cause. And yet, somehow, you're still here. You are not functioning off theology alone. You are operating from exposure. You hold evidence in your spirit residue from unseen war zones that would leave most people mentally shattered and spiritually paralyzed. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Psalm 23:4. You've survived things. Not everyone comes back from long nights of spiritual terror. Daytime encounters that turned sacred spaces into battlegrounds. Dreams that weren't metaphorical but dimensional. You didn't just imagine the fight, you bled in it. And the scars? They don't show on your skin. They echo from your frequency. You are the veteran that wears no uniform, but heaven knows your rank. Have you noticed how your silence makes certain people restless? Not because you said anything, but because your presence convicts what they've tried to conceal. You've walked through betrayals not just engineered by humans, but orchestrated by spiritual entities designed to shake your identity. And yet, your discernment grew sharper, your prayers grew heavier, your sight is more precise. You've learned how to pick up frequencies others ignore. You've walked into rooms and felt atmospheric tension shift before a word was spoken. Your nervous system may have registered it as anxiety, but your spirit knew something unclean was near. In Mark 5, when Jesus approached the man possessed by legion, the spirits reacted before he even spoke. That's what happens when someone who carries kingdom authority steps into occupied territory. And that's why you make certain people twitch. It's not intimidation, it's spiritual recognition. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5. That's why you were isolated, not because you were abandoned, but because heaven needed a secure location to embed classified insight into your soul. Isolation wasn't exile, it was an initiation. You weren't just tested, you were stamped. Have you ever wondered why you feel grief after certain conversations, like something in the room died and no one else noticed? That's because you're functioning at a spiritual frequency above the norm. You don't just carry information, you carry revelation birthed from encounter. That makes you both precious and dangerous. The deep-sea anglerfish survives in lightless realms with crushing pressure. How? Because it evolved to thrive where others can't breathe. That's your spiritual reality. You weren't meant to shine on stages. You were built to glow in realms of pressure and death. surviving what others don't even detect. And because of that, spiritual surveillance surrounds you. You're not protected because you're soft. You're protected because you're a carrier of dangerous revelation truths that could unravel decades of deception in a single sentence. When you speak, systems shake. When you discern, spirits panic, for it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Matthew Asarim, you are proof, not just a believer, a witness, and that makes you a liability to anything built on illusion. In history, Corrie ten Boom, a Dutch Christian who hid Jews from the Nazis, survived Ravensbrück concentration camp and lived to tell of miracles amidst death. Her story wasn't built from theology, it was shaped by encounter. She once said, "There is no pit so deep that God's love is not deeper still." You carry that same depth. In contrast, Aleister Crowley, the occultist who dabbled in rituals and astral travel, sought access to spiritual realms without surrender. His journey ended in torment. The deeper he went, the darker it got, because revelation without submission corrupts. You were chosen to see the dark, but never become it. Then there's Elias, a quantum physicist who survived a lab accident during an experiment with resonance frequencies. After waking from a coma, he could hear people's emotional states as literal notes and static. He began to avoid crowds, not out of fear, but because the noise of human pain was deafening. His gift was both a blessing and a burden like yours. Why do people think you're too intense or too deep? Because surface people can't understand souls built from storms. Because your tone carries echoes from realms they've never entered. I have told you these things, so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. John 6:33. You're not mystical. You're marked. You're not dramatic. You're delivered. And now, the evidence within you is sacred property. That's why divine protection isn't optional. It's protocol. You're not just a child of God. You're an archive, and archives must be preserved not for nostalgia, but for future battles. What you survived wasn't random. It was credentialing. And now, your existence challenges every lie that says God doesn't intervene. So when systems tremble at your peace, or people flinch at your gaze, or whole atmospheres shift, when you enter a room, it's not arrogance. It's proof, and proof must be protected. Number 7. You have the kind of calling that can't be touched without consequences. Why do some people's lives unravel shortly after they mishandle someone they claim to love? They don't always connect the dots. One moment, their influence dries up. Next, they're drowning in emotional chaos. Their peace evaporates. Doors slam. Opportunities stall. Relationships dissolve without clear reason. But spiritually, there is a cause. Because when they crossed you with unclean motives, they didn't just touch a person, they trespassed sacred ground. Who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? The one who has clean hands and a pure heart. Psalm 24:3-4. You're not just someone with potential. You're someone sealed by divine assignment. The kind of seal that carries invisible alarms. There are protocols in your life, pre-installed spiritual parameters that activate consequences the moment someone tries to tamper with your soul under false pretenses. Some came into your life pretending to be supportive. They smiled. They complimented. They studied you, hoping to extract insight or imitate your energy. But their intent was tainted. And intent is everything in the spirit realm, because heaven doesn't respond to faces, it responds to motives. That's why, when they overstepped, their life started to buckle, not because you retaliated, but because divine enforcement doesn't need your permission. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Galatians 6:0. There was a man once named Darius, a corporate strategist in Berlin. He befriended a woman of deep discernment just to learn how she led with integrity. He copied her work, sabotaged her relationships, and used her name to secure a major contract. He won in the short term, but within months, every deal crumbled. Client dropped him. His peace vanished. He began having nightmares. What he thought was strategy was actually spiritual theft, and he touched a covenant he was never cleared to access. Have you ever noticed how people who betray you often seem to suffer quietly from things they can't explain? It's not karma. It's spiritual backlash from violating sacred agreements. Because you, chosen one, are not random. You are a living contract, a walking promise, a covenant written not on paper, but in frequency, encoded with purpose that heaven intends to protect at all costs. Nature teaches us this too. The Mimosa pudica, or sensitive plant, collapses its leaves instantly when touched, not out of weakness, but defense. It's designed to protect its core from predators. In the same way, your spirit reacts when energy around you becomes invasive. People think they're being rejected by you, but what they're really experiencing is rejection by the divine seal on your life. They will fight against you, but will not overcome you. For I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord. Jeremiah 1:19. That's why you don't crumble like they expected. You are spiritually booby-trapped, not in vengeance, but preservation. When someone approaches you with ego, deceit, or control, they're not just stepping into your life, they're stepping into an active covenant guarded by divine order. And when a covenant is violated, it triggers a legal response in the unseen realm. You don't have to say a word. The judgment was already written. Even in architecture, load-bearing beams are marked. You don't touch or remove them without causing collapse. That's who you are in the spiritual design. You're not decoration. You're structural. And touching you recklessly isn't just dishonor, it's destabilizing to the entire building. That's why some people fall apart after crossing you. You held up more than they realized. And let's talk about reality. Pope John Paul II once warned that the greatest danger to our future is spiritual indifference. Those who approached you with manipulation disguised as love, gossip disguised as concern, or sabotage disguised as advice were not just indifferent, they were rebellious. And spiritual rebellion has consequences. No human control can delay. In contrast, Malala Yousafzai, the Nobel laureate who survived an assassination attempt by extremists, continued her calling, even as her enemies tried to erase her. Why? Because her purpose was more than survival. It was sacred resistance. Your journey mirrors this same resilience. You rise, not in spite of attacks, but because your rising is divine retaliation. Why do some people seem allergic to your presence after they cross you? Because their soul knows it touched something eternal. Because spiritual disobedience echoes far louder than spoken apologies. No one lights a lamp and puts it in a hidden place. Instead, it is set on a stand, so that those who enter may see the light. Luke 11:33. That's you. A lamp that cannot be dimmed by manipulation. A flame that exposes the intentions of the room You don't carry a casual destiny. You carry a charged assignment. You weren't sent here to be nice. You were sent here to be necessary. Necessary for generations. Necessary for cycles to be broken. Necessary for spiritual orders to be reset. So yes, when people mishandle you, there are costs. And no, they don't always trace it back to you. But that's not your concern. You were never meant to prove your worth through suffering. You were meant to demonstrate heaven's commitment through preservation. You're not rising by accident. You're rising because you were designed to trigger awakening. And when people treat a divine trigger like a toy, they learn the hard way. The consequences weren't from you. They were from the agreement protecting you. Number 8. You're a living portal. And that makes you a threat to controlled reality. Have you ever noticed how people try to categorize you, but nothing ever fits? That's because you weren't made to fit. You're not just a person. You're a portal. A divine access point between realms. A spiritual conduit between heaven and earth. You receive what others chase. You release what others suppress. And you shift rooms without raising your voice. You don't just think outside the box. You exist in a different spiritual stratosphere where the box never even existed. And that alone makes you dangerous to structures built on rigidity, performance, and false order. The wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it is going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. John Schloss Shamona. You don't brainstorm, you download. You don't advise, you transmit frequency. You've said things at just the right moment that felt too sharp, too timely, too specific to be coincidence. That's because it wasn't coincidence. It was convergence. Heaven spoke through you because you're calibrated to divine bandwidth, like Elijah calling down fire in 1 Kings 18. You speak and it echoes. You pray and realities bend. You're a walking breach in the matrix of controlled existence. Have you ever felt like you're being tracked by both favor and resistance at the same time? It's because portals draw attention. Both angels and opposition notice when divine openings move through time, space, and flesh. Controlled systems depend on predictability. They want people to comply quietly, follow blindly, and doubt anything unseen. But you bend time. You disrupt expectations. You break patterns simply by showing up and refusing to play small. You'll think of someone and they'll text you. You'll speak something and it manifests. You'll walk into a room and tension. You can't. Name starts to crumble. It's not witchcraft. It's alignment. You're operating on prophetic resonance, and resonance shakes walls that pretend to be immovable. In nature, black holes are portals, not just absorbers of matter, but gateways into unknown physics. The event horizon around them defies natural law. That's what your presence does in controlled spaces. It distorts limitation, forcing everything around you to either transform or collapse. That's why some people love you, some people fear you, and some people can't figure out why they can't stop watching you. They're not reacting to your personality. They're reacting to the pressure shift that your spiritual frequency carries. Call to me, and I will answer you and tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know. Jeremiah 33:3. Your insights aren't taught, they're revealed. And that's why no earthly credential can fully explain you. Take Frank Lloyd Wright, the revolutionary American architect. He wasn't just designing homes, he was channeling unseen harmony into physical structure. His organic architecture blurred the line between nature and building, between vision and matter. His creations, like falling water, weren't planned on blueprints alone. They came from another frequency, and the world still marvels. In contrast, Adam Neumann, the former CEO of WeWork, tried to brand himself as a visionary. He spoke of spiritual energy, disruption, even elevating consciousness. But it was all facade. There was no alignment. Only manipulation of spiritual language for profit. The system imploded. His fall wasn't just financial, it was the backlash of trying to walk as a portal without divine assignment. Why do controlled systems get uncomfortable when you speak clearly and calmly? Because you don't need credentials to carry the truth. Because what you carry wasn't earned, it was entrusted. And here's the mystery. You don't always know how you know. You just know. Your dreams are more than dreams. They're intel briefings. Your thoughts are more than thoughts. They're tuned waves from heaven. Your instincts aren't guesses. They're sacred echoes from somewhere deeper. In architecture, oculi, circular openings in domes, like the one in Rome's Pantheon, were designed to let light in from above. They weren't just decorative. They aligned with celestial movement. You are heaven's oculus, strategically placed in rooms, families, and timelines to let divine light break through spiritual ceilings. You are not here to blend in. You were sent to crack the system open from the inside. This is why you're not just protected, you're preserved. Not just shielded from harm, but hidden from dilution. Any energy, person, or atmosphere that tries to cloud your access gets spiritually filtered. Your clarity is too important to be compromised. Like the prophet Daniel in Daniel 10, whose prayers activated angelic warfare in unseen realms. Your spirit moves faster than time, and your words ripple through dimensions. You don't just pray, you pierce realms. That's why you've felt resistance. That's why certain people try to silence or dismiss you. They feel the weight of what you haven't even said yet. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. Romans 8:19. You are what creation has been waiting for, not because you're perfect, but because you're open. What beliefs or fears have been holding you back from fully embracing this openness? Because through you, God access environment. Through you, heaven uploads reform. Through you, timelines shift. Curses break, structures shake, and blindfolds fall off. You can't be explained because you weren't meant to be. You were meant to be witnessed. Portals don't announce. They open, and when they do, nothing stays the same. You weren't sent here to fit the mold. You were sent here to fracture the illusion. And that's exactly why portals don't walk around unguarded. Number 9. Your power isn't loud. It's legally binding in the spirit. Have you ever wondered why your quiet confidence intimidates those who rely on theatrics? It's because your power doesn't come from sound. It comes from standing. You don't have to be loud to be lethal. You don't have to be seen to be spiritually sovereign. You don't have to explain yourself because your power isn't performance. It's legal access granted by heaven itself. In spiritual terms, you don't just speak, you legislate. You've been through wildernesses that functioned like courtrooms. Every private breakdown was a deposition. Every betrayal became a legal clause. Every act of obedience, every moment you chose integrity over ego, turned into legal precedent. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord. Isaiah 5:17. You are walking with spiritual jurisdiction. That's why certain atmospheres shift when you enter, not because of charisma, but because the courtroom of heaven already ruled in your favor. You have legal standing in the spirit, and that terrifies anything built on illegal authority. Take Mother Teresa. She never yelled. She never performed. But entire empires of indifference trembled when she walked into a room. Her spiritual rank didn't need stage lights. It was evident in her peace. That's what you carry. People confuse it for passivity. But it's legislative presence. You move with divine jurisprudence, and your soul holds receipts. In contrast, Harvey Weinstein, once powerful, loud, and revered, but his power was built on exploitation and fear. It was theatrical, not legitimate. When truth rose and accountability found voice, his entire kingdom crumbled because legal authority always collapses counterfeit control. Why does your silence feel louder than others shouting? Because your silence isn't passive, it's legal. It doesn't just watch, it enforces. You've walked through fire that became your anointing oil. You've endured spiritual droughts where you still chose to plant hope. You've passed through emotional deserts where your faith had no audience, only God. And that gave you something few: have credibility in courtrooms unseen. Truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you lose on earth will be lost in heaven. Matthew 18. This isn't poetry, it's legislation. Your words echo through realms, not because they're poetic, but because they're legal actions. When you say, I release this, heaven processes it like a divine filing. When you say, it ends here, you're not speaking into the void, you're closing demonic contracts. You're like an earthquake that moves under the radar, no loud eruption, just tectonic shift. Your presence is seismically disruptive to systems built on fragile foundations. That's why demons don't flee because you scream. They flee because your voice is recognized in spiritual jurisdictional databases. In Job 1, we see Satan ask God for legal permission to test Job. Why? Because even darkness knows boundaries. Nothing happens without spiritual legality. And you've been sealed by assignment. So every time someone tries to slander, manipulate, or delay you, they're not just offending you. They're trespassing spiritual land. In the natural world, the maglev train, one of the fastest on Earth, moves silently, with no friction. But it requires precise alignment of magnets and propulsion systems. Likewise, your spiritual authority isn't noisy, it's precision alignment with heaven's will. That's what makes you unstoppable. Let me tell you about Amara, a woman who never made waves in public. But every time she prayed, things broke in her bloodline. Addiction fell, depression lifted. Her children suddenly felt peace without knowing why. She never sought attention, but everyone felt covered when she was around. Why? Because she didn't just pray, she legislated. Her decrees carried consequence in the unseen. Is not my word like fire, declares the Lord, and like a hammer that breaks a rock in pieces? Jeremiah 23:29. Your words carry force. Your prayers are court orders. Your declarations are divine filings in the registry of spiritual authority. That's why you're surrounded with invisible protection. Not because you're delicate, but because your rulings must reach their targets unimpeded. In ancient architecture, keystones are silent but central. They bear the weight of entire arches. Without them, the structure collapses. You are that keystone in your bloodline. That's why the enemy tried so hard to take you out early, because if you stay standing, everything holds. You will also decree a thing, and it will be established for you, and light will shine on your ways. Job 22:28. You've been given clearance, not by title, but by testing, not through applause, but through alignment. When you speak, things move, not because you hope they will, but because spiritually, They must. So the next time you feel overlooked, underestimated, or doubted, remember this: they don't see your spiritual badge, but darkness does. Heaven does. Creation does. Why do some people get uncomfortable when you speak calmly about things others scream over? Because your calm isn't casual. It's legally enforced dominion. You didn't earn your power through performance. You earned it through persistence, purity, and private obedience. Now you carry authority that can't be revoked. So declare it. Break it. Bind it. Release it. Your voice is recognized in the places that matter most. And that kind of power, it cannot walk around unguarded. Number 10. Someone important tried to take you out and failed both publicly and privately. Have you ever wondered why certain influential people suddenly went silent about you? Why the very ones who tried to bury your voice can't explain their own collapse? Someone once moved against you strategically, intentionally, and spiritually. Not just an ordinary person, but someone with reach, someone with connections, access, and arrogance. And it wasn't just petty gossip or childish envy. It was a calculated, behind-the-scenes effort to sabotage your assignment. They studied your weaknesses, monitored your rise, and when they sensed momentum building around your purpose, they struck. But they forgot one thing: you are spiritually embargoed. Heaven has sanctions in place over your life. You're not just protected, you're restricted airspace. Anyone attempting to breach that holy perimeter without clearance is dealt with in the invisible, and they were. The moment their motives darkened, divine surveillance kicked in. Touch not my anointed ones, and do my prophets no harm. 1 Chronicles 6:22. There was a fall, a spiritual collapse that never made headlines. It wasn't broadcast, but it echoed through the spirit realm. Some contracts suddenly fell through. Their name lost influence. Favor began to leak from their lives like water from cracked vessels. Their private health faltered. Their relationships shifted. And no, it wasn't karma. It was a consequence. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. Psalm 6. They touched what heaven had sealed. They crossed into sacred jurisdiction, uninvited, and the courts of heaven responded with precision. No public spectacle, no retaliation from your end, just an unexplainable unraveling of everything they built on deception. Pope Francis once said, "The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose. It will defend itself." That's exactly what happened with you. You didn't fight back with vengeance. You stayed still. You let the truth handle it. And it did. Your stillness wasn't passivity. It was divine cooperation. Sam Bankman-Fried, a former crypto billionaire and founder of FTX, once praised as a financial prodigy, behind the facade of altruism, he manipulated systems and misled millions. When the truth came to light, his empire crumbled, his wealth evaporated, and now he faces years in prison. That's what happens when someone builds their throne on lies. They eventually fall on the very foundation they thought was secure. What if the delay you once cursed was the very detour that saved your soul? What if the opportunity that slipped through your hands was actually a trap heaven snatched you from? There's a reason your path was blocked in places. Divine intelligence had to neutralize access points before an ambush could land. Conversations were disrupted mid-sentence. Emails never sent. Phone calls mysteriously dropped. That wasn't a coincidence. That was a divine firewall. Certain trees like the sequoia have bark so thick and insulated that they can withstand raging forest fires. The fire scorches everything else, but the sequoia stands tall. That's you. Fire surrounded you. But it couldn't penetrate what God designed to endure. Micah, a young producer in the music industry, humble, but gifted. He signed a deal with a company that promised mentorship, but subtly tried to exploit his sound. Contracts were sabotaged. His reputation was almost destroyed. But when he prayed one night, something shifted. The next morning, the company's senior executive was exposed for fraud in an unrelated investigation. Micah lost nothing. His gift, now flourishing in peace. No lawsuit, no revenge, just divine reversal. When the enemy comes in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord will lift up a standard against him. Isaiah 59:19. The spiritual fallout on your behalf wasn't revenge. It was heaven's standard being raised. It wasn't about getting even. It was about maintaining protocol. What they tried to do wasn't just against you. It was against a divine pattern coded into your life. And patterns like that cannot be dismantled by ego or envy. Your journey hasn't just been protected, it's been surveilled. Every hidden snare has been seen. Every dagger aimed at your back was intercepted before it landed. That's why you still wake up with peace. Why do you still rise when they swore you wouldn't? You've been elevated in the spirit because you survived attacks meant to abort your future. They will fight against you, but they shall not prevail against you. For I am with you, declares the Lord, to deliver you. Jeremiah 1:19. So now, you're not just covered, you've been upgraded. The warfare forced heaven to elevate your clearance. You're walking with protocols most people don't even know exist. That's why certain doors remain closed, because your presence demands inspection before any room can contain you. Why are you still rising while others have faded into irrelevance? Because God made your vindication visible. Even when your battle was private. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a coincidence. This was covenant enforcement, and what they meant for evil, it became the very platform that proved your legitimacy. So walk boldly, speak freely. You survived what should have destroyed you, and now you carry the evidence. The fall wasn't yours. The exposure wasn't yours. But the favor, it is. Number 11. You were hidden in plain sight while forces created decoys to distract the enemy. Why do you think people who barely understood your calling tried so hard to copy it? Why were counterfeit versions of you strangely more visible, more celebrated, more attacked while you felt overlooked in your own story? It wasn't rejection, it was redirection. You, God's chosen one, were never meant to be exposed prematurely. Your visibility was divinely rationed because the level of spiritual artillery formed against your destiny required a different kind of protection. So heaven wrote an unusual defense strategy: camouflage through distraction. You are my hiding place. You will protect me from trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance. Psalm 32, Sheba. The warfare wasn't aimed at you, it was thrown at decoys made to look like you, while you were being fortified in private. Spiritual counterfeits soaked up attacks meant for your future. And yes, it was frustrating, watching your voice echoed by people who didn't bleed for the truth, seeing others bask in attention, only to crumble under pressure. You've silently survived for years. But this wasn't theft, it was tactical noise. The true target had been concealed. You ever wondered why certain names rose quickly, flared brightly, then disappeared into silence? It's because they were never meant to last. In nature, the monarch butterfly has a toxic twin viceroy. Butterflies mimic their appearance to ward off predators. That mimicry keeps both species alive. In the same way, false versions of you created a spiritual smokescreen. The enemy thought they found the real threat, but you weren't even in range. While others were chasing optics, you were being coded in revelation, rebuilt by divine architecture, like a blueprint sealed in a vault until the foundation is ready. You were not in hiding, you were under spiritual encryption, a frequency so protected that only heaven could decode it. He will hide me in the shelter of his sacred tent and set me high upon a rock. Psalm 27:5. This is why you felt unseen in rooms where your impact should have shaken walls. It's why doors closed right when it felt like breakthrough was due, and why people mistook your silence for irrelevance. But heaven was writing a story that couldn't be tampered with. And now the unveiling has begun. Let's talk about Frida Kahlo, the iconic Mexican painter. In a world dominated by masculine surrealism, she painted her pain with unapologetic rawness. For years, she was overshadowed by her husband, Diego Rivera. Critics mocked her. Galleries rejected her. But the truth couldn't stay buried. Today, Frida is revered globally. While Diego's legacy has faded into the background, she wasn't hidden because she lacked power. She was hidden because the world wasn't ready for the weight of her truth. And not all imitators are innocent. Jordan Belfort, once known as the Wolf of Wall Street, rose quickly by selling charisma as truth. He built his empire off illusion, but truth caught up. The collapse wasn't just financial, it was spiritual. The system, protected by shadows, can't survive when light enters the room. What if your delay was heaven keeping you out of range of a spiritual sniper? What if being ignored was the only way to be preserved long enough to evolve? There's a woman named Estelle, a school teacher in rural South Africa. Quiet, gentle, unnoticed for most of her life. Her students loved her, but the world barely knew she existed. She wrote poems on her lunch breaks, tucked them in a drawer, never published them. One day, a visiting volunteer found them. Within a year, her words had reached Parliament, used in campaigns for justice, and translated into 6 languages. She wasn't overlooked. She was revealed on time. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus pais presece, pais presece. While others ran ahead chasing applause, you were being insulated in divine stillness. Your name was never meant to be echo, it was meant to be thunder. You're not here to trend, you're here to transform, and now the decoys are collapsing. The false voices are losing volume because the real you, the dangerous you, is surfacing, for there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be brought to light. Luke 8:17. You've outlasted the noise, and now comes the revealing. But it's not just about being seen, it's about being sent. You were hidden not for your protection alone, but for the preservation of a heavenly frequency that could not afford to be intercepted. Isn't it wild how the most powerful people are often the most overlooked until their moment arrives? Could it be that you were never late, only guarded for an appointed time, like an eclipse that darkens the sky, only to reveal a glory no one can deny? You are about to emerge from shadows carrying weight that no imitation could counterfeit. And now the enemy isn't just distracted, they're disarmed. This isn't about vindication, it's about revelation. You weren't passed over, you were positioned, and now it's time to walk out of hiding. Number 12. There's a legal seal on your life's mission, and it can't be interrupted without divine approval. Have you ever wondered why certain things just wouldn't move no matter how hard you prayed, fasted, or fought for them? Have you noticed how the doors you begged to open slammed shut, while the ones you never knocked on swung wide at the last minute? It wasn't sabotage. It was surveillance. There is nothing casual about your existence. Every twist in your timeline, every detour you mistook as delay, every breakdown that felt like rejection, none of it was random. Your life has been under divine encryption from the beginning, not just symbolically, but legally, in the spirit realm. Your mission is sealed under jurisdiction that outranks demonic interference. For the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. Romans 11:29. This means your mission, your breakthroughs, your healing, and even your silence, they all operate on a divine protocol that cannot be intercepted without permission. You don't just carry potential, you carry protected intelligence, a classified assignment. When you lost that opportunity, it wasn't because you were inadequate. It was because the offer came laced with unseen sabotage. When that person ghosted you, it wasn't personal, it was preventative. They were being spiritually ejected before they could infect your process. You weren't just being protected from heartbreak, you were being preserved from infiltration. We see this divine encryption. The Nautilus shell grows in perfect spirals using the golden ratio, a code so precise. It's been studied by architects and physicists for centuries, but it can only expand when it's completely sealed. Likewise, your life has been coded for sacred expansion, not reckless exposure. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Psalm 91:1. Let's not ignore the frustration. Your enemies have tried everything. They studied your habits, mirrored your energy, tried to track your rhythms. Some even attached themselves to your circle under the illusion of loyalty, only to quietly collect intel. But none of it worked. Why? Because your life isn't running on predictability. It's unfolding by revelation. Your blueprint isn't accessible to human logic. You don't move based on opportunity. You move based on clearance. Even when you think you're choosing, you're being positioned. What they call hesitation is actually divine rerouting. What they interpret as naivety is spiritual masking. Do you know how many times the enemy celebrated too early? How many times did they think you were vulnerable, only to fall into the very traps they set for you? Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German pastor and theologian who stood against the Nazi regime. He was imprisoned, silenced, and ultimately executed, but even his enemies couldn't stop the ripple effect of his mission. His writings, smuggled from prison, would later shape generations of theology. Bonhoeffer's voice was sealed, not silenced. On the flip side, Bernie Madoff, a financier once celebrated on Wall Street, built his empire on lies. He projected charm and success, attracting the trust of global elites. But his influence was hollow, a Ponzi scheme that crumbled catastrophically. His fall was not just public, it was prophetic. He violated the unseen laws of truth, and his collapse echoed beyond finance. That's what happens when false structures challenge sealed assignments. They implode. No weapon that is formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. Isaiah 54:17. The truth is, you don't just walk with favor, you walk with frequency authorization. You're encrypted with a vibration that activates divine protocols. You were built like a quantum lock, a structure in science that only opens when every frequency aligns with its unique signature. That's why nothing forced works around you. It bounces, it breaks, or it simply falls apart. So those moments you called failure, they were actually instructions encoded in disguise. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delights in his way. Psalm 37 23. That relationship that didn't work, it was intercepted. That delay in your career, it was divinely staged to reroute you into authority. The season of stillness that made you question your identity, it was encryption mode. You were being hidden, recoded, and recalibrated. Are you starting to see it now? That nothing about your story has been random? What if the very places you grieved were the exact spots God redrew your map? Have you ever considered that your setbacks weren't setbacks but security protocols activating in real time? Let me tell you a story. Lion, a humanitarian strategist in Central Asia, was poised to receive a government grant that would have funded his outreach for 5 years. A month before the announcement, a rival organization slandered his name, costing him the deal. He wept. For months, he spiraled. But in that same year, he was invited by a global ambassador to co-lead an underground rescue mission, one that impacted lives across 3 nations. Had he accepted the earlier grant, he would have been legally bound to stay local and miss his true assignment. What he thought was a loss was actually divine redirection. The Lord frustrates the plans of the nations and thwarts all their schemes. Psalm 33. You are not just alive, you are legally authorized to shift atmospheres. That's why demonic forces can't touch your mission without consequence. And that's why people who tried to exploit you quietly began to fall apart after they crossed a line they didn't even know was sealed. So here's the truth. You are not just guided. You are encrypted. Your future is not fragile. It is firewalled. Your assignment is not passive. It is protected by legal seals in realms most people don't even believe exist. You are not untouchable because you're clever. Number 13. The darkness knows you can't be bought. That's why you're monitored closely. Why is it that no matter how quietly you move, eyes always seem to follow you? Why is it that even when you walk away from the spotlight, some unseen force tries to pull you back into spiritual confrontation? Could it be because your integrity is more terrifying than any weapon they've ever created? You are one of the rare few in this generation who cannot be bought. That statement alone separates you from 99% of people. In a world where compromise is currency, where playing the game is applauded, and where convenience is prioritized over conviction, your refusal to bend has not gone unnoticed. It has been flagged by heaven and by hell. The eyes of the Lord search the whole earth in order to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. 2 Chronicles 16-9. You're not just someone with potential, you're someone with an incorruptible spirit, and that makes you a disruption to systems built on bribes, bargains, and backdoor deals. They thought they could offer you a position. They thought they could dangle opportunities. They thought validation would weaken your voice. But your soul doesn't do business with darkness. You don't trade sacred purpose for temporary applause. This is why you've been presented with deals that looked divine but were draped in poison. Romantic connections with people who seemed sent but sought control. Media partnerships promising wide reach but demanding you water down your convictions. Invitations to exclusive circles that required silence on key issues. And each no you released sent tremors through spiritual systems. You exposed your incorruptibility, like a non-Newtonian fluid, which resists penetration when struck with force. Your soul responds to pressure not by shattering, but by hardening with clarity. That kind of resistance terrifies structures of control. Think of Greta Thunberg, a Swedish climate activist who stood her ground at world summits and rejected politically safe scripts in favor of uncomfortable truth. She refused to be softened by celebrity status or silenced by authority figures. Her bold no to systems of convenience turned her into a global icon of disruption. You're the same in the spirit, unmoved by applause. Unwavering in truth. On the flip side, consider Ye, Kanye West, a musical and cultural icon who once carried a prophetic edge, but whose refusal to stay grounded in truth opened doors to self-idolatry and controversy. His desire for control eclipsed his initial spiritual fire, and now his legacy is as much a warning as it is a story. Systems love a powerful voice until it stops playing by heaven's rules. Better is a poor man who walks in his integrity than one who is perverse in speech and is a fool. Proverbs 19:1. How many times have you walked away from a stage others begged for, simply because your discernment screamed, "Trap"? Have you noticed how many blessings come with invisible strings? Why do you think so many people you trusted switched up when you refused to play along? Because they weren't just watching you. They were testing you, trying to find a crack, a place to manipulate your perception. They couldn't handle your resilience, so they monitored your silence, but it didn't work. This is why surveillance around your life has intensified, not with guns, but with slow shifts, fake flattery, algorithmic elevation followed by quiet shadowing, emotional bait, and subtle relational shifts. It's psychological wear, and psychology identifies this as cognitive dissonance. You destabilize their system simply by not folding. You shall not pervert justice or show partiality, and you shall not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes. Deuteronomy 16:19. You've likely been targeted more through charm than chaos. When influence fails, they double down on manipulation. They study your patterns, hoping exhaustion will win over conviction. But exhaustion doesn't sway you, it refines you. One modern story. Aisha, a journalist in London, was offered exclusive access to high-level stories. If she toned down her investigative intensity, she declined. Within months, the outlet she refused collapsed under scandal, and independent sources credited her exposure as the catalyst. She walked away from comfort, but not from truth. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. 1 Corinthians 10:13. Your boundaries aren't pride, they're protected. Heaven has seen many compromise their calling for convenience, but not you. What's one boundary you've set or reinforced that felt challenging at first, but ultimately strengthened your resolve? You are the oak tree on a cliff, standing firm in storms. Immune to popularity, your roots went deeper when they tried to pull you shallow, and that's why you're a threat. Because systems can handle rebels, but they can't handle the unshakable. You aren't heavily guarded because you're fragile. You're heavily guarded because they're at risk if they find your weakness. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because, having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life. James Achat, Shatim Esra. So when perfect offers come, when the spotlight shines, when comfort calls, remember, refuse the bait, release the no. Every refusal resets the system's expectation, because every no you speak is a declaration of covenant. And when they realize you can't be bought, they won't just fear you, they'll honor the presence guarding you. Number 14. Your silence was never a weakness. It was a surveillance tactic. They thought your silence meant fear, passivity, doubt. But what they failed to realize is that your silence was the highest form of spiritual intelligence. It wasn't a retreat. It was reconnaissance. You weren't quiet because you lacked the words. You were quiet because heaven was collecting evidence. Every time you held back, every moment you chose to observe instead of react, divine surveillance was at work. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus, Altar Koma. Your angels weren't just watching for your safety. They were gathering intel, recording patterns, tracking betrayal, identifying cycles, and most importantly, separating the real from the fake. While they were running their mouths, testing your limits, and plotting behind smiles, your silence was setting the stage for divine justice. You weren't playing dumb. You were letting people reveal themselves. That's what wisdom does. It waits, it watches, it listens for what isn't said. Whoever remains silent is considered wise. Whoever closes his lips is deemed intelligent. Proverbs 17:28. You didn't need to confront them immediately because you already knew everything hidden would eventually surface. So you let it. Your silence was the trap they walked straight into. They underestimated you because you didn't bark back, argue, or expose them on sight. But you were never operating on their level. You were moving on divine timing. And now that heaven has gathered enough evidence, the response won't be emotional. It'll be executed by the spiritual forces assigned to you. Can you recall a time when your quiet observation and patience proved to be your greatest strength in a difficult situation? You're not in survival mode anymore. You're not trying to prove anything. Defend yourself, or make people see your worth, because now your moves are informed by data collected during the silence. Strategy has replaced sensitivity. Discernment has replaced desperation. You're making decisions based on truth, not trauma, alignment, not anxiety. The people who thought you were weak are now nervous, and they should be, because the quiet one they tried to manipulate has emerged with clarity, precision, and divine backing. In the world of nature, the snow leopard moves in absolute silence. It glides along impossible terrain without ever being noticed until the precise moment of impact. You've been the same. Kitta, calculated, spiritually camouflaged, and terrifyingly effective. Now look at someone like Shakira, a global superstar who remained silent for years while quietly enduring betrayal and public pressure. She didn't retaliate with noise. She came back with lyrical precision that cut deeper than any press release. Her silence was never defeated. It was data collection. And when the time came, the truth spoke louder than any drama ever could. In contrast, think of Anna Sorokin, the infamous con artist who posed as a billionaire heiress to exploit wealthy social circles. She made a lot of noise, staged an entire identity, but it collapsed the moment scrutiny arrived. Her silence in court wasn't power, it was exposure. False narratives always fall apart when divine timing steps in, for nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light. Luke 8:17. There's a reason people tensed up in your silence, a reason their hearts raced when you said nothing at all. Your stillness carried frequency, your lack of response made them confront themselves, and your energy interrupted rehearsed manipulation. When you chose not to speak, they revealed everything. The prudent keep their knowledge to themselves, but a fool's heart blurts out folly. Proverbs 12:23. You've walked through rooms that were rehearsed like plays, and your presence disrupted the script. You became the glitch in their matrix. the mirror to their illusion. Because while they were busy performing, you were gathering intelligence that could not be bought or taught. You're now emerging from the silence like someone who knows exactly who's who and exactly what to do next. Every step you took, every moment of stillness, every unseen battle wasn't just survival. It was strategic warfare on a higher frequency. You weren't overlooked or abandoned. You were encrypted. How has this period of encryption prepared you for the clarity and action you feel now? The protection over your life wasn't optional. It was essential. The silence wasn't absent. It was archiving. The delays weren't denials. They were divine decoys. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46, Asir. You are not loud, but your steps are seismic. You are not dramatic, but your presence is disruptive. You are not explainable, but you are undeniable. And now that the time has come, you are no longer silent. You are sovereign. And now you understand. Your silence wasn't void. It was a vision. It was power gathering in the shadows, preparing for revelation. Every moment you held your tongue, heaven was writing your testimony in invisible ink. Only now is it being revealed under the fire of divine timing. The silence you endured became the foundation for the strategy you're walking in now. You weren't passive. You were protected. You weren't hesitant. You were hidden, and what once looked like weakness has now become your greatest form of wisdom. Your silence wasn't the absence of power. It was the proof that power never needed to announce itself. So if this message spoke to your spirit, if it confirmed what you've lived but never had words for, don't keep it to yourself. Like, comment, and share this with someone else who needs this reminder. Subscribe to the channel and turn on that little bell so you won't miss what heaven wants to deliver next. This space was built for those who walk with fire in their bones and silence in their steps. To everyone who's supported this channel, whether through super thanks or simply by watching, sharing, and praying, thank you. Your presence here is not just appreciated, it's powerful. You are part of a collective movement of people walking in divine truth, spiritual discernment, and uncompromising destiny. And I speak this over you now. May your silence continue to carry weight. May your clarity grow sharper with every passing day. May no trap, no delay, and no hidden agenda ever interrupt the rise that heaven has already written for you. You are covered. You are chosen. You are unstoppable. Until next time, stay grounded, stay guarded, and stay glowing in truth. Blessings on your journey.